In this video, we're diving into the explosive downfall of Liam Cornett, better known on the streets as the Lamb. A lad from Liverpool who didn't just play gangster, he lived it like a Netflix villain. Monte Carlo helicopters, £55,000 Rolex watches, and Bentleys on the Riviera. While back home, his empire flooded UK streets with coke. From a mansion in the Costa del Sol, Cornett controlled a drug network that stretched from Merseyside to the southwest, a multi-million-pound operation run through secret phones and loyal lieutenants. But it wasn't surveillance or snitches that brought him down. It was a grenade, accidentally set off in a dingle bedroom by a mum who had no idea what she was sleeping next to. That boom kicked off one of the biggest gangland busts in UK history. 28 gang members jailed, over 5 million lines of phone data analysed, and the streets of Liverpool locked down twice a day just to get him to court. This is the story of how one Playboy drug lord's empire crumbled and literally went out with a bang. It was a quiet night in Dingle, South Liverpool. The kind of night where nothing much happens. Kids were in bed, TVs murmuring behind closed curtains. And in one terraced house on Beresford Road, a woman climbed up to a wardrobe, completely unaware she was about to trigger a chain of events that would take down one of Britain's most powerful drug empires. A sudden explosion tore through the silence like a gunshot. Windows rattled, smoke billowed from the bedroom window. Neighbors ran into the street in panic, convinced there'd been a bombing or worse. But this wasn't a gas leak, it wasn't a fire. It was a grenade, homemade, tucked away on top of a wardrobe, and now accidentally detonated in the middle of a residential home. Police and emergency service crews raced to the scene, expecting the worst. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. Inside the smoke-filled house, officers stumbled upon a stash that screamed cartel level. 158 kilograms of amphetamines, almost a full kilogram of cocaine, with an estimated street value of £1.6 million. It wasn't just a drug bust, it was a jackpot. And it had just landed in their laps, thanks to one careless explosion. A 44-year-old woman was arrested at the scene and charged with possession of amphetamines with intent to supply. But as the evidence was logged and the forensics team swept the house, something didn't sit right. The volume, the packaging, the sheer scale of the haul. This wasn't your everyday street-level setup. That blast hadn't just rocked a single home. It had cracked open the front door to a nationwide criminal empire. An empire powered by encrypted phones, armed couriers, and a web of dealers stretching from Merseyside to the English Riviera. And at the very top of it all, sipping champagne on the Costa del Sol, was a man who operated like a ghost. His name was Liam Cornett. But to those in the game, he was known as the Lamb. Liam Cornett wasn't your average drug boss. He didn't hang around on corners or get his hands dirty with the product. He stayed out of sight, always one step removed, always out of reach. But his name echoed through the streets of Liverpool like a warning. The Lamb, short for on the lam, slang for a fugitive, a man constantly on the move, off the grid, untouchable. Born and raised in Huyton, Cornett started out small, clocking up convictions as a teenager for dishonesty and violence. By 2012, he was already serving time for a fray. But the real shift came when he left the UK behind and disappeared into the underworld of Europe. In 2014, he was jailed in the Netherlands after a violent run-in with police, an incident that saw him drive straight at an officer. Over there, they don't name defendants. But back home in Merseyside, the streets were talking, and the name Liam Cornett was spreading like wildfire. By the time he re-emerged, Cornett had reinvented himself as a kingpin, He bought a house in Spain, set up shop on the Costa del Sol, and began building something far more sophisticated. He made connections in North Africa, started importing drugs on a major scale, and used the UK as his personal marketplace. He didn't deal with street-level mess, he delegated. He sat above it all, flashing jewelry, high-end cars, and luxury holidays. This wasn't just about profit, it was about image, about power. And back in Liverpool, his name was becoming legend. Nightclub bouncers knew it. Beat coppers knew it. Undercover cops kept hearing it whispered in the background of all the major incidents. Cornet had become more than just a criminal. He was a myth in motion. But behind the flash and the whispers, he was running something brutal, organized, and relentless, fueled by encrypted tech and loyal foot soldiers ready to do the dirty work. But now, after one grenade and one mistake, his empire was no longer in the shadows. They weren't street kids or part-time players. They were loyal, organized, and hand-picked to move weight, run phones, collect cash, and silence problems. This was the Lamb's inner circle, and when his empire fell, every one of them went with it. Michael Rice, the trusted right hand, ran the day-to-day grind and dealt with the fallout. When the pressure hit, he was still taking orders and carrying weapons. Kieran Eves, the strategist, helped expand the business into new cities. Smart, connected, and calculated, he played a critical role in logistics and distribution. Jack Ball, the fugitive, fled the country when the heat came down. But he wasn't just a runner. He was a key player in the gang's expansion into the southwest. Craig Gowland, the money man, managed the graft phones, coordinated drug transfers, and helped move serious cash up the chain. Carl Maddox, the link to Devon and Cornwall, handled operations on the ground and oversaw multiple courier runs between the northwest and the south coast. Bobby Hill, based in Plymouth, supervised couriers and local operations with precision. Quiet but trusted, and deeply embedded in the system. Each one had a role, each one helped the machine turn, and each one went down when the empire finally blew apart. By the summer of 2017, Liam Cornet was no longer just a name on Merseyside's radar. He was living like a man who thought the rules didn't apply to him. While his dealers peddled drugs across Britain, Cornet was throwing wads of cash in the air on the streets of Monte Carlo.
80 quid drop, son! 80 quid drop, son! Whoa! Fly the boot!
Footage recovered by police shows him, alongside his trusted lieutenant, Michael Rice, on what looked like a gangster's dream holiday. The two of them gliding through Monaco in a convertible Bentley, flying high in a private helicopter, and partying like royalty in one of the world's most expensive playgrounds. Cornet wasn't hiding, he was flaunting. Rolex on the wrist, designer clothes, throwing cash like it was confetti. He wasn't just making money, he was making statements. And he wanted everyone to see it, the luxury, the power, the untouchable confidence of a man who thought he'd cracked the game. But what Cornet didn't know was that police were already watching. Behind the scenes, detectives had begun to piece together his network. Phone data, surveillance, undercover work. The explosion in Dingle had exposed the tip of the iceberg. And now, that footage of Cornet making it rain in Monte Carlo. That would become part of the evidence used to paint the full picture of the empire he was building. While he was sipping champagne in the Med, his crew back in the UK were under intense pressure. Surveillance teams were following cars, monitoring drug runs, watching burner phones light up across Liverpool, Hull, Exeter, and beyond. Every smile caught on camera, every flash of cash, every move he made in Monaco would later help prosecutors prove just how far he'd gone and how high he thought he'd climbed. The Lamb believed he was untouchable, but the police were already closing in. Behind the flash and flare of Cornet's jet-set lifestyle was a machine. Cold, organized, built for scale. His was no backstreet operation. It was a criminal enterprise that functioned like a business and ran like a war. At the center of it all were the graft phones, burners that addicts would call day and night to place their orders. Heroin, crack, cocaine, speed, whatever they needed, whenever they needed it. These weren't occasional deals. These were hotlines for destruction. In just 2 months, the Liverpool line received over 17,000 calls. The Hull phone got more than 2,300. And in Exeter, a brand new line got over 1,100 calls in its first week alone. Orders would be taken, couriers dispatched, cash collected, like clockwork. And then there were the EncroChat devices, encrypted mobile phones designed specifically for high-level criminals. Expensive, sophisticated, completely off the grid. Cornet's personal EncroChat, branded as an Aquarius device, gave him the power to run his empire remotely from Spain without ever touching the product or the people moving it. It was through these shadowy devices that instructions flowed, deals were arranged, drops were scheduled, and when trouble hit, like the grenade going off in Dingle, it was over these encrypted lines that Cornet gave the order, stand still. A cold command to freeze the network and go quiet. But even with technology on their side, Cornet's crew weren't afraid to get physical. When police stopped a car in South Liverpool, they found Michael Rice armed with a Glock handgun. These weren't just dealers. These were enforcers, soldiers, ready to defend the operation with violence if needed. It was sleek, it was ruthless, and for a while, it worked. But as the surveillance piled up and the data poured in, detectives began to see the full scale of the web. Millions of lines of text and call records, thousands of miles traveled by couriers, dozens of names, dozens of cities, and all of it linked back to one man, the Lamb. For a while, Liam Cornet seemed untouchable. He moved through Europe's underworld, club hopping in Monaco one month, holding meetings in Cardiff the next. When he wasn't partying on the Riviera, he was in the shadows, arranging drug shipments from Spain and North Africa into the UK. In summer 2017, Cornet made a quick return to the Netherlands for a music event. It wasn't a planned arrest, but local police flagged him at the border as an undesirable due to his past violence. He ended up spending 9 days in a Dutch prison, locked down in a foreign cell. Nothing major came of it legally, but for detectives back in the UK, it was a signal. He was on the move, and getting sloppy. Back in Merseyside, officers were building a mountain of evidence. Wiretaps, surveillance, courier logs. By October 2018, they were nearly ready to strike. But then, unexpectedly, Cornet made a move that shocked everyone. He flew back to the UK. And he didn't exactly come in low-key. As he stepped off the flight at Manchester Airport, Cornet was wearing a £58,000 Rolex, the kind of statement piece reserved for someone who believed they were still in control. But the moment he walked through those arrival gates, he was arrested by police who'd been waiting for the signal. There were no chases, no shootouts, just the quiet collapse of a man who'd spent years living loud. Cornet was taken into custody, interrogated, charged, and suddenly, the man who'd made millions by staying one step ahead of the law was now firmly in its grip. His arrest marked the end of the myth and the beginning of a court case that would grip Liverpool like few others had. By late 2018, police weren't just chasing a gang, they were dismantling a national drug empire. Liam Cornet's network sparked one of the most complex investigations ever led by the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. What started with a grenade blast in Dingle had grown into a multi-force crackdown on a criminal web stretching across the UK. They called it Operation Anvil. Anvil soon linked with Operation Redweed in Devon and Cornwall, and Operation Germanic further south, merging into one massive offensive. Detectives sifted through over 5 million lines of phone data, messages, GPS logs, call records, mapping out the empire in forensic detail. Then came the hit. In December 2018, while Cornette sat in a cell, Operation Valkyrie launched nationwide raids. From Liverpool to Plymouth, doors were kicked in, suspects arrested, and drugs, cash, and phones seized in a coordinated sweep. At the center was Cornette. But 27 others, from couriers to lieutenants, were pulled down with him. The gang was dismantled. The charges were in. Now it was time for the trial. By summer 2019, the trial of Liam Cornette wasn't just a court date. It was a full-blown event. The city knew his name, the streets knew his face, and now the system was preparing for a spectacle. This wasn't just any old gangster in the dock. This was the Lamb, a man whose empire had touched every corner of the country and whose presence alone triggered lockdown procedures usually reserved for terror threats. Security was extreme. Twice a day, the city shut down. Streets were sealed, traffic stopped, snipers positioned. A full armed convoy, armored vans, outriders, armed police, rolled through Liverpool like it was cartel country. Inside that van sat Cornette, calm and blank, watching the world he once controlled from behind bulletproof glass. This was the man who ran millions in drugs from a villa in Spain, who threw cash in Monte Carlo while his foot soldiers flooded council estates with heroin. Now, the same city he used to move through unseen was locking itself down just to put him on trial. The empire had fallen, and its king was finally in the dock. Inside Liverpool Crown Court, prosecutors laid out the full scale of the empire he'd built. The encrypted phones, the 158 kilos of speed, the street-level graft lines that spanned from Anfield to Exeter, the footage of Cornette in Monaco, throwing cash in the air. And now, all of it, the parties, the Rolexes, the helicopters, came crashing down under the cold weight of hard evidence. Cornette, watching from behind a video link at HMP Frankland, barely reacted as the court heard how he'd orchestrated the supply of Class A and Class B drugs on an industrial scale. He was found guilty, and when sentencing day came, Judge Anil Murray made no effort to sugarcoat it. Cornette was handed 26 years in prison, not suspended, no deals, just time, hard, serious time. With his sentence read out, the Lamb was done. But it didn't end with him. 27 others stood behind him in the dock over a series of hearings. More than 200 years of combined prison time was handed out to his gang. A sweeping end to one of the UK's most expansive gangland operations in recent history. Here are some of the main players. Michael Rice was sentenced to 12 years and 8 months for conspiracy to supply Class A and B drugs, with an extra 6 years added for carrying a loaded Glock handgun. Kieran Eves received 13 years and 9 months for conspiracy to supply drugs, burglary, and possession of criminal property. Jack Ball was jailed for 7 years and 4 months after fleeing to Los Angeles, and later admitting to conspiracy to supply cocaine. Craig Gowland was handed 17 years and 4 months for supplying Class A and B drugs, and for possessing a stun gun. Carl Maddox was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months for his role in distributing Class A drugs into the Southwest. And Bobby Hill received 8 years and 8 months for overseeing courier operations and helping expand the gang's reach into Plymouth. You can run an empire from the Costa del Sol. You can build a pipeline from Liverpool to Plymouth, flood cities with kilos, and wrap it all in designer watches and encrypted phones. You can party in Monaco, fly helicopters over the Riviera, and believe, for a moment, that you've beaten the game. But the game always plays back, because no matter how smart the network, no matter how far you run or how loud you flex, all it takes is one mistake, one flash, one blast. And when it comes, it doesn't just crack the walls, it detonates everything you've built. That's how it ends for men like Liam Cornette. Not with a shootout, not with a last big run, but with a grenade in a wardrobe and a kingdom turned to rubble. For more raw and real crime stories, hit the like button and subscribe. Until the next episode, stay alert and stay safe.